Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
How does a 24-year-old make the first film of Santosh Sivan, Srikar Prasad, who's probably one of the giants of Indian editing, Ranjit Barot, and of course Aamir Khan, because Aamir, when we start making this film, he hadn't yet been cast for Qayamat. So in many ways it's shot before but released after.
Aditya Bhattacharya's Raakh is a powder keg of a film. Whenever you revisit the film, you can't stop thinking about it for a day or two. It's that kind of film. An early exponent of Bombay noir, Raakh is also one of Aamir Khan's top films. I don't believe the actor has done something like this again since. One of Aamir Khan's very early films, it was shot before Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, though it released after QSQT. Raakh was made with a stellar cast and a young, hungry crew that would go on to make some of the finest films since. This is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. But before moving on, an important reminder. If you enjoy organic conversations centered on Indian cinema, Love of Cinema podcast was created for people just like you. So if you find value in the podcast, if it helps you in discovering new films or new facets about familiar films, do consider supporting the show. Love of Cinema podcast is my passion project, and with every episode, I've attempted to create something that cinephiles will continue to find value, not just today, but over time as well. To create something that goes beyond banter, beyond trending films. So if you find value in the conversations on the pod, please do consider supporting the show. Your support will help me continue creating content with shelf life for fans of Indian cinema everywhere. You'll find the link to support the show in the show notes. You can also support the show directly from the pod website. It's fast, it's easy, and your support is greatly appreciated. Independent pods like this don't have a platform for amplification and distribution. Independent pods rely on amplification through its listeners. So if you like the episode, please share the episode on social media, as that will help other people discover the pod. I was much excited to connect with Aditya for today's episode. Talking Raakh with Aditya was something I wanted to do for a while now, and it was great listening to him talk about the film and share Bombay stories from the time, late 80s that is. Aditya shared some interesting stories related to Raakh and involving RGV, Maniratnam, and the late producer Jammu, Sugandh. The man who made Raakh, Aamir Khan's most haunting film, Aditya Bhattacharya. Here goes. Hey Aditya, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a beautiful day here in Barcelona. It's my favorite kind of combination, which is the cold and the sun together,
Right.
Winter sunlight is probably one of the most beautiful things. So, yeah.
So Aditya, I'm going to ask you to dial the clock back. Okay, so let's take us back to the mid-80s. You're about to embark on your first feature film. Can you give us a feel for the kind of cinematic headspace that you were in at that time, the films that you were fond of at that time, films that had left an impression on you around that time?
Some of them actually would be visible, I think, in my first film. So what I call, vintage Scorsese, right? So both Taxi Driver and Raging Bull in some ways, which are love letters to a city, but they're also full of pain and angst, because just like Bombay in the 80s, the kind of New York that he's talking about is also, it's a fraught city. It's a city that has a lot of things that have gone wrong, a lot of dreams that are the so-called Boulevard of Broken Dreams, So that I think is probably the most kind of obvious, but otherwise, which I think is typical for film lovers or cineasts of the period. So, in India, everything came roughly around 10, 15 years later than the rest of the world because of various reasons. So, I would say the German New Wave, so, Wim Wenders, Fassbinder, definitely somewhere the whole French Nouvelle Vague thing. And for me, I've always been drawn to what you would call elevated genre today. So, talking about films which were not necessarily, when they were made, they were not considered, art house or whatever, but then became so, which I actually is a genre that I, both in literature and in cinema, and actually in music as well, right? See, for example, if you think about the Beatles, when they're doing it, it's very shamelessly to make money. And, it's driven towards the young public. But today, you can't think of that as being just pop music.
Right.
It is so much more than that. So for me, people like perhaps George Michael, Elton John kind of fall into that kind of space. I'm sure there are a lot of artists in the US as well. I mean, for example, for me, let's say somebody like an Eminem who is in the most, how do you say, lucrative part of the business, but it is actually, in some ways, it is contemporary art. So,
For sure.
for filmmakers like Walter Hill, who's kind of, overlooked in many ways, who kept doing this kind of genre cinema. Michael Mann, who many ways, perhaps in today's day, maybe a David Fincher is also in that kind of space, where, see, they are not trying to get to a Cannes Film Festival, but they do, right? I mean, like early Tarantino is actually also a very, very good example, right? Where all he's trying to do is do something that he loves doing in a popular genre. He's not trying to be snobbish or anything like that. But so I would say that kind of film, for me, I must also admit that, being the son of Vasu Bhattacharya and the grandson of Vimal Roy, whilst, yes, there is an appreciation for their work, my connect to their work actually happens much later. Because as a 20-something-year-old, I'm hoping your listeners will appreciate that there is that thing where, जो घर का है वो उसका वैल्यू आप पूरी समझ नहीं पाते हो, या I mean, it takes a certain maturity where I can then begin to see threads between, my work and what my father or my grandfather did. So I was definitely much more drawn by the names that I spoke about. Also because at that time, you see, this is much after the, let's say, the Salim Javed angry young man phase, right? So at that time in India, there is no urban young cinema, because Raakh literally precedes Parinda or Satya or anything like that. There was actually nothing of that in that space at all. So in a sense, let's say I'm making the kind of film that I would like to see from Bombay, but nobody is making it. And obviously, my dad and his, that kind of age group. So my dad, or someone who was his assistant, Basu Chatterjee, or Sham Benegal, or Muzaffar Ali, or I mean, see, I guess in some ways Muzaffar Ali's first film, Gaman, is kind of an, how do you say, an urban love story, of bittersweet love story of sorts. But then again, it's a much more lyrical, much more, it has to do with where he comes from. For example, for me, I did not at all connect with songs in movies, right? I mean, Raakh, notably, actually, for that time, I don't think there were too many movies, films being made which didn't have songs at all.
Right.
And so, I mean, in fact, oddly enough, the person who did the music for the film, Ranjit Barot, was actually earning his daily bread by working with, Lakshmikant Pyarelal or Shankar Jaikishan, doing background and songs, which in the first film that he scored, there was actually no songs, or, I mean, how do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, so yeah, I mean, I gave you quite a long answer.
No. That's very interesting. Yeah. And we'll talk about the score later on. I love the score for Raakh. But just before moving on, Aditya, would you say, when you were saying that there were no like really urban films that were talking about the urban youth or urban crime films, would you say like Raakh is closer to films like Aaj Satya?
Yes, definitely closer to Arth Satya. Arth Satya, in some way, you see, Raakh is, how would you say, it's a very different sensibility. So Bombay, the beauty of Bombay is that it is the Bombay of the Sabhya Maharashtrian and the theatre and the Tendulkar. But it's also the Bombay of people like me who are Bengalis, who speak Bengali and English, understand Marathi, don't really speak in Hindi so much, and our perspective on the world is very different from the Arth Satya perspective of the world. So, Arth Satya perspective is an insider perspective, in a sense of the world seen from the point of view of a middle class Maharashtrian police officer. Now, that, Bombay is wide enough to contain very, very different perspectives. So I'm a Bandra boy, right? So my thing was exploring a Bandra boy slipping into another Mumbai, and which is both a kind of, nightmare or some kind of a nihilistic fantasy, I guess. And because, people in Bandra didn't really know what Madanpura felt like.
Right.
And people in Madanpura used to come to Bandra to look at the stars or look at Carter Road or Bandstand and, Yeah. So what I'm trying to say, you see, in some ways, and a film which, bizarrely for me, it's kind of incredible how seminal the film is. So Saturday Night Fever is a very New York film, right? But the Taxi Driver New York and the Saturday Night Fever New York are very different. Now, they're both real. They both exist. But they're from very different ways of looking at the same city. So I'm just giving, I don't know why that
makes sense. Yeah.
Also because Saturday Night Fever actually affected the style dressing sensibilities of every Bandra Bandra boy that I can think of, and probably half the world's urban youth. So yeah.
How do you get the idea for something like Raakh, which is a very cynical look at Bombay, and it's essentially the way I look at the film is that it's a story about two men, one who is an helpless kind of a civilian, who is clueless as to what he should do, and he's hit by trauma, and there's this other person, who is equally helpless, though otherwise empowered by the state, as a law and order person. And they are joining forces to do something about, elements that are just wreaking havoc in the city. So, how do you make that your first film?
Well, I feel fortunate in some ways where, see, definitely there's a certain amount of, see, I never went to film school. In fact, the first thing that I did, which was actually quite indulgent, but the first thing that I did when I got out of school was I made a short film, in fact, with Aamir, which is the first time that he ever acted in anything. Aamir didn't want to act at all.
Paranoia.
Called Paranoia. I don't even know. I mean, there's probably something somewhere, but I would have to look for it. But you see, self-expression with vulnerability. So, where you growing up in the kind of home that I did, you must remember how revolutionary, let's say, Anubhav in 1970. There is the advantage of being brought up in a home where you're encouraged to be vulnerable. You're encouraged to be yourself and not to follow trends or so-called market or whatever it is, because and it is done through examples. So I was just speaking about two examples. One is from my father, which is Anubhav, and the other is Dobiga Zameen. Now, if you look at what the rest of India is making at the time when Dobiga Zameen is made, or what the rest of India is making when Anubhav is made, you'll realize that, these were, it required real courage. Also because remember, these films were debt financed. So, there was no Sethji's money or there was no studio money. These people literally were mortgaging their houses to make those films. So, when I make Raakh, Bombay is in the grips of losing its innocence. So it is when Bombay is becoming, as Mahesh Manjrekar would later call, the city of gold, right? It is exactly that time where it is losing its innocence. There is machine gun fire on Pedder Road streets, which is, things which for us were fairly traumatic. There are chopper and sword battles, right? Which is something that when you speak to people from even parts of Bombay, they're like, kya baat kar raha hai, Like they can't even believe that's something, but that is there. And whilst from a relatively privileged background, I've always been drawn by the other side. Let's say the other side in Bombay, of course, it's literally the rail line that divides the city. So the east and west. And this, in some ways, is I think at that time, the biggest preoccupation or biggest kind of, I guess, trauma, where you feel so out of control that what if something happened to you or to a loved one or somebody that you know? How do you then well, correct it, or how do you seek justice, or what do you do? And I guess because I'm the age that I am, which is, more or less, I would say, Raakh, the journey begins when I'm 22, 23, and I finally make it when I'm 24. So, because of that age, the answer is a little bit kind of nihilistic, it's a little bit going up in flames. The other thing for me is the reaction to the Hindi cinema of those days, where usually the hero will get the revenge, and then just as he is getting the revenge, the cops will arrive and the bad guy will go to jail. The hero will get married or whatever, or meet his mother or whatever else, right? Now, the truth, however, because of my having met with people, I mean, I had friendships with both, lawbreakers and lawmakers, which again is interesting for that age to have gone that deep into. Where perhaps people, when they see my characterization of certain characters, they will see that ये कहाँ से आया? Because either you know it, क्योंकि वो हिंदी फिल्म रेफरेंस तो नहीं था, है ना? तो वहां पे you get to realize that, when you enter this world, there's no easy way out. So when you seek vengeance, that same fire that is burning inside will finally burn you also. You will become the same thing as the person that you are trying to vanquish or destroy, which I feel is perhaps the most notable thing about Raakh from a 24-year-old is that Pankaj Kapoor dies, Aamir goes to jail. Right? I mean, which for me, for a Hindi film, is kind of, अरे ये क्या हुआ? कि Supriya Pathak gets married to somebody else, है ना? Pankaj Kapoor dies, and Aamir, having wrought his vengeance or got his revenge, goes to jail at 24. So yeah, I don't know if that fully kind of answers your question on.
It partly does, yes. And so you and Aamir, I read somewhere, are school friends. Is that accurate?
Yes. So he came to our school, to Bombay Scottish, from St. Anne's, which was an SSC school. He wanted to do an ICSC, pass out from an ICSC school. And so he came in the last year. If my memory serves me right, I was probably his first friend in Bombay Scottish, in the sense I actually went out to introduce myself and speak to him. And then, because of various reasons, he's also a Bandra boy. I think the bus, home or whatever. So then we started frequenting each other. Then we actually had a band together also, where Mansoor, his cousin, was kind of the band leader. He had just come back from MIT and, had a guitar, I think a bass guitar. Aamir was interested in drums. I was kind of, writing songs and whatever else. So that there was this whole kind of little Bandra group of kids, and we used to. It's the Pali Hill and Carter Road kind of thing, which is where I lived, he lived. It was walking distance, and those are different times. So people would cycle on the streets or play cricket on the streets, or downstairs in the compound, and so that is actually what happened. And in fact, I then, whilst in school, saw him. I mean, I never use these words, but kind of as an alter ego, as like somebody that could play me, metaphorically speaking, be that young person that I wanted to tell stories about. And so then the first trial, in a sense, is with Paranoia. And then, then we start writing. And then, in fact, at a certain point, I realized that a lot of the film, because of the ethos or the language of a lot of my characters, that I will need a certain kind of Hindi, Urdu, where that was not my language. But that's the kind of language that Aamir spoke at home. And so, in fact, his aunt, so that's Mansoor's sister, then kind of actually quite hesitantly in the beginning, because I kind of said to her that, will you help us with the dialogue? So she had never done anything like that. But then she becomes actually quite an important part of the writing process. And thereby we have, the kind of language, in the sense that both Aamir speaks and, let's say, the Karmali clan kind of speaks amongst themselves. Because that's not, I mean, I had heard it, but it was not my forte in any ways, So there's that. And then for me, perhaps one of, everything actually, Raakh in some ways, for me, is the kind of testament where if you go forward towards something with, let's just call it a pure heart, where there is a very clear thing you want to do, which has nothing to do with anything else. Like, it has nothing to do with fame, success, money. It is just that you want really badly to tell this kind of story. It's kind of amazing, because what I try and imagine today is, how does a 24-year-old make the first film of Santosh Sivan, Srikar Prasad, who's probably one of the giants of Indian editing, Ranjit Barot, and of course Aamir Khan, because Aamir, when we start making this film, he hadn't yet been cast for Qayamat. So in many ways, this is, I mean, it's shot before but released after, kind of thing. So I'm just trying to think that how does a 24-year-old manage to find, probably the most important cinematographer in recent years, the most important editor in recent years, and other figures like that, and including, for example, Sangeet Sivan, who later is a filmmaker. He was our EP, and actually that's how I find Santosh, is through him. In fact, Mani Ratnam then finds Santosh because at a certain point we are looking at some rushes of Raakh at Prasad Labs, and he was waiting outside, and he asks,
Oh, wow.
He says, do you mind if I come and watch? And when he sees it, he's like, who shot this? And then Sangeet kind of knew him, so he said, it's your brother. He said, oh my God, ask him to get in touch. And that's how yeah, I mean, there's some pretty crazy stories. I mean, like, the guy who at much later point is the kind of financier behind Lagan, as somebody called Jammu Sugandh. And the film industry is very incestuous. We all know each other, etc. But at a certain point, I would say much after, I mean, this is in the last, 15, 18 years, I meet him somewhere, and, someone says, Jammu, you met Aditya, and he kind of smiles and he says to me, he said, "आपको याद है कि नहीं?" So I kind of go like, and then suddenly it clicks to me. He says, which is the first film I ever financed? And it was Raakh, because at a certain point, so this is a funny story, because we shot some of the film. This is a typical indie way of doing things. We shot part of it and went to raise the rest of the monies. Because, my family or my father had nothing to do with the film in any way. It was completely, he didn't even know what I was making. And Asif Noor, who was again a newbie producer, he'd never made a film before. He's basically somebody who had a few fashion shops on Linking Road, and we'd become friends, I think, through Javed Jafri. We went and we showed it to the Indus Video guys, who were, I think, Gul and Harish Thawani or some, whatever, I don't remember the surname. But anyway, it was a Sindhi, Gul and Harish. And they saw it and they said, "Nahi, ye to Gana nahi hai, it's quite dark," and all that. And there, I think Jammu was their cousin. Jammu used to run something called Glamour Printing Press, which used to do all the kind of posters and lobby cards and everything. And he said something to them in Sindhi. Now, I understood enough Sindhi to understand that he said to them, "I quite liked it." So they said to him in Sindhi, "If you liked it, you put your money." And he gave us 10 lakhs in a plastic bag. Now that's 50% of the budget of my film. I still remember that we came out of there and we had a problem because we had come in a rickshaw and we had 10 lakhs in a plastic bag. And, Asif, he's from Baikala and, whatever, but we felt a little bit. So finally, they actually gave us a man who rode with us all the way home. Because, we didn't expect. And so then Jammu reminded me, he said, the first film I ever backed. And he said, it turned out lucky for me because in those days, Indus was a VHS label. In those days, it was a cash and carry business. So apparently, Jammu made 3.5 times his money in one day. Because Raakh released after Qayamat, so there was a lot of demand where...
okay.
Yeah, Aamir Khan ka next film. And now, obviously, at that time, nobody knew that that's what's going to happen when the film gets done. So, bizarrely enough, it also marks, and then I'll tell you the story about how it also marks the entry of Ram Gopal Verma.
Yes. I love these kind of stories, and I think how I have an inkling where this is going. But yes, I would love to hear that. But this is some story, Aditya, and I just wanted to say that at that time, 10 lakh in a plastic bag, and we're talking the highest bill is 100 rupees, right? I mean, because this is in the
this is in the mid 80s.
So there are no 200 bills or 500 bills.
No,
So-
it was a heavy bag. Yeah. It was a heavy bag, and I mean, it's pretty much a cash economy India, at that time. This is pre-credit cards and whatever. So, yeah, I mean, only thing is we weren't expecting firstly to be, to be concluding the deal that quickly, and secondly being given the monies which was actually very canny of Jammu, because you see what, with, let's say, especially someone like Asif, what would usually happen is then, you have your first port of call and then you go to 2-3 other people. And kabhi kya hota, what can happen is that there's a garmi about a project. People start calling each other saying, and somebody might offer more. So this way that Jammu immediately closed the deal, in some way was that he had an inkling that this is going to be worth something. It's worth betting on, uh, kind of thing. In any case.
Yeah, that sense, right. Yeah. That's a great story.
Yeah. May he rest in peace. I mean, see, it's odd because I never thought that we would come to a time where I actually miss even the old-time financiers. Because the one thing that people don't fully appreciate is that the film industry is built on jigar. It is built on a gut instinct. And, you say what you might about, including the Bharat Bhai Shahs of the world, right? That they are actually taking hard-earned money and putting it on something where nobody is guaranteeing that to them at all. Like if it's gone, it's gone. And see, in a film, you literally know in 3 days that everything you put in is gone. It could also become 10 times. But today, I see very, very few people that would actually just say, I've got a good feeling about this. I like this guy. I like the story or this actor or the music or whatever it is, for whatever reason. And they're willing to literally put their money where their mouth is. That is something, especially in a post-corporate or a post-Amazon, Netflix world. I had never thought, because for me, earlier I used to kind of almost, not exactly look down upon, but, these used to be the guys that one used to say, they'll never back anything different or this and that or whatever, which is also true, because all of them had their own gut instincts and they would, like Raakh, if we hadn't shot that first bit by ourselves, we would have never been able to raise money from a traditional film finance community. In any case, sorry, this is now is kind of digressing and going elsewhere.
No worries. Now, Aditya, were you surprised by how good Aamir's performance just in general ended up being, considering that it was only his second film? And
No, not at all. I see. I will not say this lightly, but one of the things that I do, and I did know then as well, is I know what I want. And I will not let you go till I get it out of you. Now, Aamir, many times, in fact, probably did, how do you say, he doubted his own ability to deliver because, there's no track record there. I did not doubt it for a second. And the reason that it became joyful and slightly painful at times, but joyful mostly for us, was that we had a kind of elder brother figure in Pankaj Kapoor. Because remember that Pankaj Kapoor is an NSD veteran. And the way that he guided, in many ways, Aamir's performances, because if you think about it, I would say almost 60-70% of Aamir's interactions in the film are with Pankaj Kapoor. And I, in that sense, when I get sure that I've found the lead of my film, like for example, a film that, only some people in the industry and some people have seen in film festivals, which is Dubai Return, which is from 2005, 2006. So, I took someone like Raakh Khan, the late Raakh Khan, who's done more than 230 films, etc., to do a co-lead with Irfan Khan. Now, most people will say, like, are you out of your mind? I mean, these are two people from completely, different traditions of, I mean, perhaps they would not even call what Raakh does in the other films acting, because, it's a kind of vaudevillian thing, right? Whereas I always believed and know that I can get it out of them. So, in that sense, I, in most of my work, have used people, sometimes with almost zero acting experience, or sometimes, they're people who are masters, and put them in the same scene together. And frankly, it's never, it for me is actually quite joyful, that process, So no, I was not, worried. And I mean, somebody would need to ask Aamir, but I believe that of recent, he did say to someone that in terms of one of his truer performances, where, it's free from artifact. It's not Aamir Khan playing something. It's almost like you can't make out, is this really Aamir Khan is like this, or, is the character like this? You know what I'm saying?
It's organic, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, because the kind of performances that he's done in his other films are very performance. They're very marked by a get-up, a certain way of doing something. Whereas in this film, he is as close to, if you had met Aamir Khan, and the performance that you're seeing in the film is actually, there's no separation in
His
that.
character is also called Aamir Hussain.
Yes. I mean, and all those are, things which I kind of, how do you say, psychologically kind of used in certain ways, and the other thing is that I come from, my background is actually from having acted a little bit, including opposite Smita Patil in Mandi and all of that.
Which I happened to watch just 2 days ago. Yes. And I admit, I did not know that was you. I just found that out, and I decided, okay, let me see which one is Aditya. The very first time I watched you on screen, Aditya, is in Black Friday.
Yeah.
You play that Dubai businessman who...
Yeah. In fact, that was, in many ways, again, these are things I don't really like to say, but I'm very proud of, in a sense. Is that without me, there would be no Black Friday. In the sense, I was actually the creative producer figure that put and then got Anurag not only on the project, but protected him, because it had come to me to make.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And then I did not feel ready. I did not feel ready. And Anurag was meant to write it. As he was writing it, he got very excited and said, I would love to. And the only thing he had till then was Panch, which was an unreleased film. And I had to guarantee to, basically at that time, the publisher figure, which is Arindam Mitra, and then the Ansaris of Midday Multi, and it's a public limited company. So that they said, will you handle him? Because it's like, it's a big project. Will he be able to handle it, and this and that? And then at a certain point, basically Arindam had come in. He was part of Midday, but then he wanted to become a producer figure, at which point then I said, you don't need two producer figures on a project. And but Anurag would not have made Black Friday if AB hadn't been in the mix at all. And so, which in the sense that for me to imagine his career without Black Friday is also impossible. Because if you don't take that, then, there's just Panch before that, and there's not very much traction happening. And then in many ways, I was responsible for getting it. I mean, see, I can't say getting it into Locarno, but making the people that decided to take it for Locarno and pushing very hard, where the whole, how do you say, the international trajectory of the film kind of takes place. So I feel very, very proud of that. Yeah, I mean, in Locarno Film Festival, one of the most prestigious screenings, it's called the Piazza Grande, which is 3,000 people in an open, and it got that, and from there, various sales, this, that. Of course, there's another side to the story, because then the film got banned, and there was a inability to deliver kind of prints or copies, and there's this whole kind of, in any case, sorry, we are not here to talk about Black Friday, but
yes, we were just talking about your acting.
It's just it's just a proof of how terribly incestuous our film industry is,
All right, let's get back to Raakh. And while we are talking about casting, I just want to say that, I love two parts, especially, which are just cast perfectly, in my opinion. One is Jagdeep as Ustad, and the other is Madhukar Toranmal as Karmali Seth. And can you talk?
But also Chandu Parkhi,
Oh, Chandu Parkhi was great. Yes.
See, these are, see, for me, these are the things where there's a musicality, there is a dramaticity of the Marathi Manus, which is being part of my city. You can't have a film that doesn't have that. You can't have a Calcutta film that doesn't have certain archetypal Calcutta characters. And for me, I used to miss that in Hindi movies. Like the Maharashtrian cop who's speaking a bizarre kind of English, or the Todanmal kind of figure, which is very much a Marathi stage theater kind of, he's a giant in that.
Of course, yes.
And so this is, somewhere also thanks to just the wonderful kind of city that we lived in those days, where despite me being a Bandra boy, I used to do Jaydev Hatangadi's Avishkar Theatre Workshop, which was in the Chabildas School in Dadar. Now, the people that attended that were basically mill workers, Kamgar people from, and through that you see certain level of faces. You then start going to the plays with them that they watch. And that color is not there in Hindi movies. At that time, Hindi films, except with a few exceptions, are usually all casting from the same, kind of palette, or same, you're seeing the same people basically, right? And so for me, that was a way of, there are background players, there are characters in the film who literally come from the kind of world I'm talking about. Because there are certain marked faces, right? Which only if you have been through certain things can you have that kind of a visage, And that for me was important. And I was a huge fan of, Chandu Parkhi and of, basically the whole Maharashtrian
Theater.
theater kind of space, which was so vibrant and very, very high quality, I mean, there was nothing, that there was laughable kind of English theater. Then, of course, there is the whole Prithvi theater, which I was part of in some ways, where, all the NSD boys came in. And then there was the Gujarati theater also, where, then I have deep friendships in that kind of world as well. But, yeah. That that was, it was important to me that I made the film with the kind of faces, the kind of music, the kind of color palette that I wanted to put on screen, and that I was missing in other films, that I couldn't quite see, and where anyone from Bombay would find a Bombay in Raakh that he will not find in other films. I mean, I feel that it kind of represents, because Bombay in films is very difficult to find without it seeming kind of, not completely true, it's rare to find Bombay. I mean, you can find bits and pieces, but generally speaking, like for me, one of the, film which I otherwise enjoyed, and I enjoyed the performances, but in Maqbool, they talk about Mumbai Meri Jaan, but I'm not being able to see that Mumbai. I mean, it didn't feel like my city. In fact, the other film, what was that film that he died quite tragically? There was one film about the Mumbai cops with, I think, with Paresh Rawal and Vijay Maurya and everything like that.
That was Mumbai Meri Jaan.
Yeah. So no, I'm talking about Maqbool,
Right.
which had the line called Mumbai Meri Jaan.
Oh, yes.
Where I didn't find Mumbai in the film. Whereas in Mumbai Meri Jaan, actually you felt the city. That was one of the films where I felt that, okay, here's someone that knows and feels the city. And died quite tragically young, actually. Yeah, anyway, sorry.
Talk to me a little bit about the depiction of police, Aditya. I mean, it's a very dystopian kind of. The police force, appears like a paramilitary force, dressed in what looks just like that, paramilitary uniforms, and
yeah. So I in some ways I feel that's actually an aspect of the film which we probably reached higher than we could fully deliver, in the sense that I had wanted to make a slightly futuristic film where, in the film, originally, I think we said after the police riots of 1990 or something like that, right? Where the whole police force has been revamped and they've been given more kind of powers, etc. So there's a slightly fascist tendency in law enforcement, which I foresaw that is going to happen. That there's going to be this, because the city is out of control and there's not enough cops. There's too many criminals. There's not enough cops. It's, so this whole encounter thing, etc., which in those days was still in its infancy. I mean, it didn't really. So, but I must say that whilst, I mean, we had a lot of fun, creating these weird police stations and all of that. It was something that I feel is, how do you say? Okay, so the other film that, I mean, again, these are kind of visible, that for me was a very important film was Blade Runner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of the shots are like totally the lighting
No.
and, they look like they're shot at magic hour. Those shots are.
Yeah. So those are the things where I guess, some level of magic realism, like for example, you spoke about Jagdeep Saab. So these are people where, I miss the character actors. I used to miss, one of the things I missed about the films from the 70s and early 80s, 60s, etc., was that in earlier Hindi cinema, whether it's the, help at home, or it's a taxi driver, or it's a postman, they were all real characters. Like they actually had lines and you remembered them, or it's a drunk or whatever it is, they became an important part of the film. That slowly started going away. It got less and less. And one of the things that I really miss and which I feel is part of our survival mantra in India is humor. Whether it is black humor or whatever, but we would not survive actually without humor and I guess without music. These are two things that keep us alive in some way. And so for me to have a slightly demential kind of characters, like the Jagdeep Saab, like a lot of my cops are kind of both menacing and funny at the same time, which for me is it's a very Bombay thing. There's this mix of the ridiculous and the sublime and the terrifying all in one, and so I guess there is this thing, and that with Jagdeep Saab, obviously there's this thing that he as a child was there in Do Bigha Zameen as a child actor, so there is that connect. Then I went on to make a film, another unreleased film with his son, in fact with Javed, called Bombay's Most Wanted. And so there's this, there's that deep affection. There's also this thing that, people like this came in and did work for very, very little money, and gave us a lot of affection and time.
But let's talk about the lighting of the film. And like you said, you were thinking about films like Blade Runner, and there is a very interesting, use of shadows. And what kind of brief did you have, or like what kind of discussions did you and Santosh Sivan have?
So, here's another magical kind of thing that happens, which is also very funny in a sense, because, and this is the amazing country that we live in, is that while Santosh and Sangeet, very cinema literate, have watched a lot of films, and they didn't understand almost a word of Hindi. So they, like Santosh had no idea what was happening in the scene that he was shooting, which for me was kind of, so what happened was he would actually be able to hone on to the, how do you say, the spirit of the scene rather than what is being said, and I come from still photography, apart from coming from a certain level of acting. And we just bonded over, see, right from the beginning, we knew this is going to be, I think we probably had 4 or 5 lights. That's all we had. I mean, literally, that's what we could afford, and that's what we had.
Right.
So I think only for 2 or 3 scenes we kind of hired stuff from outside because we couldn't afford it. Santosh, Sangeet, and Sivan is their father, who is a filmmaker and DOP. They owned a certain amount of equipment, and we shot the film with that equipment. And so this was a homegrown film. Like most of the locations in the film are either my house, my grandmother's house, and then, some Irani and this and that. But those were really negotiated very hard because we didn't have the wherewithal. So the look of the film, frankly, is actually born from my choosing Santosh because of he had this very available, light approach to work. Available light or practicals, or where you're basically creating drama with very little. And bizarrely, our conversation was actually having looked at stills that he had taken or I had taken, and kind of realizing that we are in the similar kind of space, sensibility wise. We like the same kind of aesthetics, let's just call it that. And then, see, I am very, 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 I mean, I kind of decide frames, and I'm very much kind of someone who gets behind the camera in terms of kind of saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing. But then, see, because this is analog, right? We are shooting on film. There's this fabulous thing that happens. So there's no video assist. There's nothing like that. So you actually get to see what you shot on Monday only on Saturday, when you've already, and you have no chance of correcting it. You have no chance of going back and doing anything to it. So there's this incredible leap of faith where once I begin to see Santosh's rushes, once I begin to see what he has shot, I realize that he is going where I want to go into 20. Like he's 20 times better. Obviously, I mean, he's a DOP, I'm not. But he's basically understood, juiced what I wanted, and is taking it beyond that, right? And once that happens, then you can really run with it. And I mean, I think it's kind of funny because my executive producer, which is his brother, and my cameraman didn't speak Hindi. And so a lot of times, I think a lot of situations basically got avoided because they didn't know what was happening, Or like some very troublesome situations where somebody is asking for something and this guy would just be oblivious, like they were in some other country. And Santosh, as always and as later, had this core unit of whether it's the focus pullers and his own team, who were completely superlative. I mean, it was superlative. I mean, imagine, I was doing my first film, and my focus puller, who was probably, in his late 30s or something like that, called Karthikeyan. Can you believe he had done 300 films? I mean, my focus puller had done So, when you do 300 films, you're like some kind of a Maradona figure, because it's like you with a kit, without shoes, without this. I mean, these guys are just at some other level. So, in our film industry, we have these kind of guys that are, once you give them your trust, and importantly, they know that, how do you say, they uh, believe that you are a leader. Otherwise, you're done for. Otherwise, what happens is then it is like, okay, how many hours, how much am I getting paid, and I'm getting out of here. And in the beginning, first week, I must say, you see, because, of course, I'm the son, grandson, Bandra, fair boy, earring, wavy hair, Sanjana Kapoor, So obviously, there is all that kind of thing of, how do you say, let's see if this kid actually knows anything. Right? I mean, is he just gotten this chance to do something because of... Now, some of that obviously is tempered by the fact that they know Santosh enough that Santosh would not follow somebody unless there was, something worthwhile, but whatever. Then, I think by the 5th or 6th day, and believe me, these guys would have followed me into the mouth of a volcano, which for me is the thing that you need to earn. With the film crew, you might have the greatest idea and this and that and all that, but are you able to get them to see the dream, believe that this is worth something? And I think that, all of them kind of got in there. And, again, I think these are things that, for example, perhaps also helped Aamir in his performance, because it was so much a very tightly knit kind of a group that had one goal, that everybody was working towards making something very, very special. Which again, it makes me laugh because a lot of them didn't know what the hell it was about, because they didn't understand what we were saying. My camera crew, most of them had no clue what was being said. But then they got into the vibe. They got into the junoon, let's say, of making the film. And for me, that's so much a part of what we do, because it's an illogical process. The whole financing, making, releasing a film is just one of those things which is so fraught with, everything that can go wrong, will go wrong, and yet people kind of, take years of their life and kind of put it in there. And the other thing, I guess, is that, considering that this was a film released, what is it now, 34 or
34 years, yes.
Yeah, years ago. And it's, despite it not really being available, I mean, sometimes, it keeps popping up on YouTube and then we take it down, again, it pops up. So it's kind of amazing how people remember a film which wasn't really, like a huge commercial success or anything like that, how it's remained in the subconscious of so many people. That for me is quite an interesting, it's interesting thing. And I think there's the truth of the journey, It's like what all of us put into it is all of ourselves. There was no cynicism. There was no vested interest. There was nothing else that we were trying. It was what I call pure love, just coursing through the veins of the film. Where by no means, I mean, it's a film that I'm 24, so, I mean, I would probably have done many things differently or whatever else, but it's true. There's no artifice there. We are not trying to please either an audience or a festival selection committee or Amazon executives or anybody like that. You know, uh, we were just making something that we really, really wanted to put out there. And then I'm fortunate that I found such uber talented collaborators, which obviously we haven't yet spoken about Srikar Prasad, who I think he was 23 or 24, and this is his first national award. I think he's got 11 after that, if I'm not mistaken. And that actually, I think, was pointed out. I think who connected us was Bharat Bala Ganapati. I think that's the person. They were doing commercials, and Srikar Prasad was doing a lot of his edits, and he kind of said to me, the fact that the negative was at Prasad, and he said, go and look at or go and meet Nani, which is Nani's Srikar Prasad's pet name. And then, I would say that he was, for me, as key as the Santosh collaboration, because it's somebody that's actually getting me, getting where I want to go, and then helping it get there.
I got to ask you this thing about the script itself, the story itself. I always saw that the way that Neeta, kind of moves on with her life, in an effort to reconstruct her life, that I interpreted as, some kind of small redemption for Aamir, because he finds his own life completely, destroyed.
Yeah.
But at least the woman that, he has affection for, and the woman who suffered this atrocity, she's able to move on slowly but surely. Is that supposed to be seen as some kind sort of redemption for Amir's character? Is that the way you saw it?
Well, I guess in some way there is we have a romantic kind of attraction to nobility, where you do your best, you fail, but in the process, you give a breath of life to someone else that you care for, or that now, for me, more than that, somewhere. So there is this. I think it's a trope in a sense. There's a nihilistic male character that kind of burns and burns out, right? But for me, right from the start, right from the fact that she is older than him, she, through the film, just wants to heal from what happened and move on, because she does not see the sense in revenge, and for me,
She's pragmatic, yes.
Well, it's more than pragmatic. I think it's a kind of wisdom. I always feel in some ways women,
More
I have
mature,
both.
yes.
Yeah, I have a son and a daughter, and at the same age, if you see a girl and a boy, the boy is still, like a child, and the girl is already kind of beginning to understand things, which
Right.
it'll probably take him a whole lot of years to get there. So for me, there is this definitely a woman's approach to when something goes wrong and how do you fix it, which is, let's not, it's not like let's burn the world down, right? And a man's approach to the same thing is very, very different. And in some way, for me, it is asking a question कि finally पाया क्या आपने, कि ये सब करने के बाद, she is reconstructing, right? She's starting a new chapter in her life. He has more or less ended his journey, right, at 24, which is kind of, I mean, if you think about it logically, it's kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, what was the whole point of this whole thing? That said, I must say that we are hypnotized by a flame, right? We are hypnotized by something. There is a purity in Agni, right? There is a purity in something that burns like that and then just becomes ashes, right? That's the title of the film, right? You're symbolically saying that this whole thing is ashes. It's ashes to ashes, no? It's that something that burns and then turns into the it has burnt everything in its path, and nothing remains except the kind of burnt out matter. Whereas her character, for me, hopefully, is somebody who stands back up, right? And is starting a new journey. I mean, there is this one time when there's a very fleeting scene where I think she's in a car and he kind of sees her. And in that, for me, she's kind of almost regal. She's kind of moved on. She's no longer trapped in this whole angst of where he is, and whereas he's, kind of fugitive in his own city, right? So yeah, I guess, the thing is that, again, this is the beauty of how we got to make this film at that time. Because sometimes I feel, whilst, we are living today in a world where, development, script writing, 18, 16, 20 drafts. Sometimes what happens is that this was not a very refined, our journey was more or less an instinctive one. There wasn't too many grown-ups telling us what to do, right? So I would consider it more like, let's say, a rock band in the early days where, the grown-ups only come in when they have to make the money. They don't tell you what lyrics to write. Because if they did, it would be a disaster. I mean, it would not reach any young people at all, right? So in this case, the thing is, none of us are so bright. We're not really thinking about all these things. It is something that's feeling right or wrong to us. And it's also, it's fraught with our conditioning, where we grew up, what is the world around us, etc. So in retrospect, yes, one can think of all of these, and I'm trying to think about, what would I have been thinking then, etc. So, there's no argument even from a Nuzhat, who's a woman writing, and she's older than us, There's really not anybody telling us why is she doing this? What is the motivation? There's nothing like that. So it's basically AB living out a certain, kind of fantasy or nightmare in his head, where for me it seemed tonally right that as Aamir goes to prison, and of course, it's interesting because in an Indian wedding, you have the fire there as well, right? I mean, there is a fire in front of her, right?
Yes.
So I just tonally felt that it was so, it just set
the duality,
of life, of how some things move on, and other things have kind of at the same time in a city, there is a murder and there is a child being born somewhere in a hospital wards. And you're seeing both, at the same kind of time is what for me, that is what I'd wanted to try and kind of achieve. And one thing that was definitely clear for me, which is also in the casting of Supriya, in the fact that she's older, is that she's wiser. She's undoubtedly, if she was in Aamir's place, none of this film would have happened, And bizarrely, somewhere Pankaj Kapoor is instrumentalizing, no, he's kind of using Aamir, even, whether the motivations may be whatever they are, but he is using Aamir to get to those people that he in uniform could not. He as a policeman could not have done what he's using or pointing Aamir in a certain direction towards doing,
Thinking one more thing, and perhaps, if Neeta was also, because there is no kind of a sign that Aamir likes her, but I don't know if we see any signs that she is reciprocal about that.
She's definitely moved on.
Right.
That is very clear.
She cared about Aamir, then probably she would have stopped him from going down this vortex,
I think she tries, but she's also at that phase where, she can't destroy her own life in order to save him. People just, in a certain sense, we have our own survival mechanisms,
Right.
Like I said, for me, more than anything else, there's a beauty to the process with which there was a freedom with which we made this film. And my challenge was to convince all of these more talented people, because see, all of these people by then have already proven what they can do, except let's say Aamir. Everybody else was somebody who I had to convince why should they be in the film, and it was not money. And we didn't have money to offer them, So that was my challenge, is that I would have to narrate or tell them the story in a way which they bought into it. And then we had complete freedom in terms of how, we executed it, we edited it, we scored it, and which I think today would be probably close to impossible for a 24-year-old to get, that level of freedom. Like when we are shooting, all those things of, Aamir falling into space, right? Let's say, there's some studio executive says what is this? What is it? What are you shooting? What does it mean? What, can you justify it? I have no idea how we would justify it, whereas those are things that I saw very clearly. Santosh completely got what we were trying to do, and, it all worked out. And then certain things, like the future police force, or somewhere, like the Karmali wedding, if we had a bigger budget, we would have probably done it, differently, etc. But, we didn't. We had what we had, and just kind of worked, at that. And now, obviously, for me, the interesting thing is, after 1.5 hours of people listening to all this, they're like, okay, where can I see this film? And it's like, I'm not sure. So bizarrely enough, and maybe it's a good sign, earlier today, and I speak to him not very often, but I was speaking to Asif Noor, my producer. And, perhaps you are a good omen, that I also realized that it's, if I'm not mistaken, Aamir is a year younger than me. So I think he's going to be 60 next year, if I'm not mistaken. And so, it may be because
Yes. I think all the three Khans, the Shah Rukh, they're all turning 60 next year. Yes.
right. So I thought it may be a good point to, bring the film back into perhaps the cinemas first, and then,
For sure. Yes.
because we've done some work in terms of doing a digital restoration and this and that, but then for various reasons, we haven't been able to, tie all the knots and everything. And also because, after the VHS thing, see, Raakh has never been on TV. It was never put on DVD. So there's either the VHS generation or the people that were actually young enough, and went, or old enough today that went to the cinemas to see it, that for whom this, podcast would kind of make any kind of sense, because otherwise it's like, okay, you're talking about a film, which unfortunately is true of a lot of my work actually, but
No, one of the points of this podcast is for people to discover new films. So, especially for the younger folks.
And, but it's kind of exciting as well, because Aamir has so many more followers actually around the world today, including, in other countries, including China.
China, yeah.
Where it would be interesting for them to kind of discover this film from, when he was very, very young, very young actor. And I actually think he's very good in the film. I mean,
one of his best films, no doubt.
I mean, I personally, obviously, I don't have much objectivity in this, but I definitely feel that I got that, I needed a certain vulnerability in the character, because I had wanted the audience to keep feeling like, is there any way we can save this boy? Is there any way we can pull him out of this? जिसको दलदल बोलते हैं ना, दलदल से हम अगर इसको खींच के निकालें, because that for me is an interaction which I wanted the audience to feel. Like, why is he spiraling, deeper and deeper and deeper into this? Because see, he doesn't actually have any existential angst. He doesn't have, like, he's not poor, he's not battling, caste or communal problems, or, he has nothing like that. He's actually from a very comfortable home. But he's got this one monster that he, is kind of battling, which is more or less inside him as well, right? I mean, and so that's something where if the character did not feel that vulnerable, and then, for example, this male thing where, the excitement when he first gets a gun in his hands, right? Which again it's things which it's kind of bittersweet in a sense, because as we've had a continued fascination around the world. I don't think it's culturally only in India where men and weapons of violence, right? And then you see what it leads you to. I mean, in
he
this
goes
film,
through the highs and lows,
yeah, and then there's the cop that's telling him that, it might seem like this now, but you'll soon find out, what this is like.
So we're going to talk about the score, Aditya. I mean, when I first watched Raakh many years ago, it was unlike anything, I had heard the score of the film. When I watched it a few years later, it sounded like something from a David Lynch film. It had that kind of a mystique to it. It had that kind of an enigmatic appeal to it. What were you guys trying to do with the music here? Because it's a very interesting thing that you guys do with the chords. And can you talk a little bit about the music?
A lot of this is there's a kind of brotherhood. Like Ranjit and me, we go way back, and we know, care for each other, and there's a tonality that he's seeing. He's older and obviously at that point more accomplished. And I am very clear in terms of what I'm seeing or hearing of a film. Like I know, like even though I may not be a musician myself, I actually even the mix itself. There's someone called Paddy who did our mix, who's absolute kind of genius. And I would say it was just as instinctive. It was probably Ranjit exploring, bringing sounds and ideas. It's also, I mean, again, this is something that I think very, very few people know. It's the first film on which Ehsan, who's, now the Shankar Ehsan Loy
Right.
Ehsan,
Yes.
plays guitar actually quite consistently and brings a certain sound, because he had just come back from GIT, Guitars Institute of Technology in LA, and he was in Bombay. And Loy has played keyboards on most of the film as well. So it was Ranjit putting together a sound palette, which I was expressing to him in my whatever language that I was. I don't actually remember what I was saying to him. And then very quickly, just like the kind of bonding that I had with Santosh, where I realized he's got it, he's got to that sound palette that is working for the film, which was again very unique definitely for its time, and definitely in terms of Indian movies or Indian urban films. And then there were certain little themes that were kind of playing in our heads, and we kind of applied them to the film. There's, I would like to think that there's something slightly magic realist about the film, in the sense that whilst it is a very real film, there's a heightened reality. Even like when, after the incident happens with Neeta, there are the bad guys going away and they throw a beer bottle into the sky, right? And the way that it crashes down, right?
The slow-mo,
yeah. Yeah. Or, the fans, right? Or that kind of people, there's strange kind of fade-ins and fade-outs and dissolves, which are all like you've gotten into almost the mind of the lead character, where, it's no longer a dryly realistic film. But, and the gangsters, whilst they are rooted in reality, they are somewhere slightly larger than life. No? I mean, there is, and the cops, for example, whilst, certain kind of characteristics are rooted in reality, they are slightly bizarre kind of cops. So the music, we tried to complement what we'd achieved on screen. I dare say that I don't think anybody else but Ranjit could have actually delivered something like this, at least in my knowledge in Bombay at that time.
Very interesting. Well, Aditya, thanks a lot. That's all I had in my notes. If there are any other interesting anecdotes which you would like to add, or oh, there was a RGV story that you were going to share.
Yeah, the RGV story, let me see if I have a brief version of it. So I, at a certain point, had, more or less soon after Raakh, had begun to kind of travel, and I was spending time in Italy and in Sicily, and I was kind of putting together my next project, which took, almost 7 years. And I hadn't been in Bombay. My mother organizes an annual awards function where in memory of my grandfather, which is the Bimal Roy Memorial kind of thing. And she and her, her team had chosen Satya and Ram Gopal Verma to give an award to. And coincidentally, I had landed in Bombay, I think 2 or 3 days before that. And at certain point, she told me, I would like you to give this award on stage. And I had not seen the film. I didn't know who Ramu was. I didn't know what Satya was. I mean, I knew there was a buzz around it, but I hadn't seen the film yet. So I land up there and I'm seated next to him. And, whilst everybody else is giving their speeches and there's some music program and all that, we are, obviously you're kind of sitting there. So you ask each other, okay, what do you do? Who are you? And all that. So he introduced himself. I introduced myself and he stood up. So, there's 2,000 people or something sitting in front. So it was kind of slightly awkward because he stood up on stage. And I kind of said, and he said in a very South Indian kind of way, he said, "Thank you, sir. Thank you." So I said, what are you thanking me for? And he said, "Sir, you are responsible for my career." Now, obviously, I couldn't go into any detail over there, but then later, there's this whole thing. So there was a legendary, film producer and theater owner and everything called Purnachandra Rao, who, was a kind of Chennai and Hyderabad figure. He had bought Raakh for the South. He had, it was running in his cinemas. And at that time, Ram Gopal Verma had been trying to basically get to do a film with him, was pitching him a film. And Purnachandra Rao at a certain point told him, see this film, Raakh, and let's make it in Telugu. So Ramu goes and sees the film, and I mean, these are his own kind of, I remember some words. And he went back to Purnachandra Rao and he said, "Sir, this is an author film. So it cannot be remade." Okay. So he said, "But I will come to you with something." And basically, he then comes back with something called Shiva, which he interprets what Purnachandra Rao is looking for. So that opens the door in a certain way.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
To the conversation, etc. And it's funny because later, Ramu and I kind of worked. I was head of international business for Verma Corp. I was kind of part of his team for a little while. And so then it was kind of interesting, and he always had this, how do you say it? It's like somebody that he had never met who had opened the doors for him. So in a sense, I guess it's a little bit like me and the Anurag story, where it's like I'm not directly kind of, but in a sense, if that film hadn't come to me and then, Black Friday, and then I hadn't been involved in certain level, then he would not have ended up directing it. And so it's kind of similar. And, it's interesting again, now, I mean, many years later, for me, there's this beauty to when you do something for the right reasons, it kind of reverberates and, causes a whole lot of other, good karma to start happening, which is all that I would say, because it's kind of amazing how that one film, Raakh, started off the careers for so many people. I mean, definitely for Santosh, definitely for Srikar Prasad. I mean, for Aamir in a certain way, because even though, Qayamat has nothing directly to do with this, but I don't think that if I hadn't become his friend, hadn't done, Paranoia together, hadn't dreamt of doing Raakh. I remember at one point, in fact, Mansoor asking me, can you suggest someone? I'm looking for a young lead, because, I was the man about Bandra. I kind of knew everybody. And he was saying, can you think of any young guy? And I remember saying to him, well, I'm working with Aamir, and he said, are you sure? And then I don't know if he saw some rushes but there's a moment in which my having cast Aamir in the lead kind of, I don't want to overstate this because I don't remember the exact things, but let's just say that in some ways, Raakh is an important moment for a whole lot of other people, and without which I don't think their lives would have gone the same way as it did. And then, recently, I was very touched because a film scholar from UT, Austin, who's actually written a book on called Lalita Gopalan, and it's a book on Bombay noir. And she cites Raakh as being kind of the first. I'm trying to remember her language now, but basically,
I think I saw the quote in the showreel, right?
yes. Where this is somebody who's an academic. I mean, she's a film, somebody who studies film, who, years later kind of sees this as being the first of its kind. So, that in some sense, in retrospect is, it's heartening, I mean, it's something that makes, and for me, it was definitely my way of realizing that I can make movies, that it kind of proved to myself that, yes, this is something that you're not just the black sheep of this family, कि कुछ तो है.
Did Basudha get a chance to see the film?
Yes, and that actually was it was a very touching moment, because I think in some ways, he was very old school. Like he's probably hugged me maybe half a time in his life, is one of those kind of that generation. But I realized, having seen the film, that there's that sense that yes, my son is a filmmaker, which really is the big, it's the big thing, because till then, and he had very, very strong, I mean, like most, how do you say, true believers or true filmmakers, we have very strong likes and dislikes, where, a film may be doing well and this and that, but for us, it's like not worth the celluloid, that it was made with. So it was definitely an important moment for both him and me. And I think he definitely, how do you say, felt ki chalo, my son is not going to, has not wasted his life or whatever it is,
Thank you so much, Aditya. This was lovely. I mean, we talked about so many things about this lovely film, and I'd been trying to track you for a long time.
Yeah, we should thank Mr. Ghosh.
Yes.
Mr. Shashank Ghosh for connecting us. He's an old friend, and somebody I love dearly, and once again have probably positively impacted his life and career in terms of his first film. I used to keep telling him, there's this thing about what we in Bengali we say Moddhobitto Bangali, like middle class Bengalis have the fear of taking the big step, and I used to keep telling him, that you're not going to make a film, and then finally him taking the big step, and connecting him with Sameer Gupta and Waisa Bhi Hota Hai happening. I'm hoping actually that I've been pushing. I would really like to work with him, perhaps with him as a producer figure. It's like payback time, and I think we've kind of liked the project to do together, and let's see. But it's been good. It's been good talking. I hope at least some of this kind of rambling conversation is of some interest to.
Oh, there were a lot of nuggets in the rambling, I'll tell you that. So
it will be something of interest to your listeners.
For sure. Thank you so much.
And hopefully we'll catch up at some point.
Yes.
When I come to your part of the world, or
Sure. Anytime.
Yeah.
If you like the episode, do consider supporting the show. Your support will help me continue creating content like this. You can find the link for supporting the show in the show notes and on the pod website. Also, do share this episode on Twitter, Insta, or Facebook. And do subscribe, rate, and review the pod wherever you listen to your pods. You can follow me on Twitter and Insta at loveofcinemasf8. Feel free to reach out there, or by email with your comments, feedback, and suggestions. You can find my email in the show notes. That's the episode. This is Himanshu signing off. And as always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.